Stefon Diggs is out for the year. Anthony Richardson is headed to the bench, and Diontae Johnson is now a Baltimore Raven. We react to the latest NFL news and give you our Week 9 waiver wire rankings on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. We're here every day, Monday through Friday, helping you win and bring home that trophy in your fantasy football leagues. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and and fantasy analyst, I should say, for NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. And we're getting a lot of news here, Michelle, early in the week. So we'll get on that. Giants-Steelers game kind of played out like we thought. Big games for Tyrone Tracy Jr. We'll see about the concussion there. And then George Pickens nearly missed 2 touchdowns. But Steelers offense looking good, Giants going in the other direction. But we were going to talk a lot more about that game, but a lot of things happened just before we got on the air. And Michelle recapped them a little bit for you in the opening. Stefon Diggs, that's a big news. It is a confirmed torn ACL. So Nico Collins is on the shelf already on IR with a hamstring injury. Stefon Diggs is there. Is this Tank Dell's season, Michelle?
It should be, but I worry he's not fully healthy, right? I don't think you just go from what we saw him do as a rookie last year, how explosive he was, what a great connection Tank Dell had with CJ Stroud last year, to all of a sudden, like, even with Nico Collins not out there, like, he's not really doing anything. I mean, I know he got the touchdown last week. He has scored a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 weeks. The receiving yards aren't really there. The targets aren't there. We have to remember he's coming off the broken leg from the middle of last season. He also got shot in the middle of this summer. Like, I don't mean to laugh at that. It's not funny at all, but like, it's just crazy that we just expect these guys to come back after they get shot and just be like, yeah, keep playing. So that's my worry with him, but he needs to step up. It might only be 1 game before Nico Collins comes back. And if Nico Collins is back, then Collins is just going to be a monster.
Yeah, they need these 2 guys back together right now. They're pretty thin. They've got some guys there. Robert Woods has hardly seen the field, but they have Xavier Hutchinson. They've got John Mechie from Alabama as well. So you look at Woods, he's been not doing much, right? I don't know why he's even on the roster. If they need him for depth, and he's hardly playing, right? They don't seem to want to get Dalton Schultz involved too much to get the wide receiver production replaced here. So it's kind of weird offense. And the other thing that's going on, it's a running team first. I mean, Joe Mixon is going nuts on the ground, and CJ Stroud is just sometimes watching him do this, and Mixon is getting all the fantasy points here. So the Texans sometimes win a lot with running game and defense. After last year was a lot of passing, and Stroud was on track there, if he'd played all the games, to lead the league in passing yards. Now you're seeing a slightly different version of this Texans offense. Maybe they're adjusting, right, to having some wide receiver issues. So it'll be interesting to see how this affects them. If Dell can hold up as a number 1 receiver, it's hard to like him this week, though, right, against the Jets. I mean, if you're the solo guy, you can be an easily marked guy against the Jets. I know the Jets aren't necessarily destroying it. They've been worse against the run, however, in the past. So I'm not sure you can go right to Tank Dell this week. I don't know if I could trust CJ Stroud this week either. Short week on the road against still a pretty good pass defense.
Yeah, I think this week is going to be a Joe Mixon week again. After that, though, especially if Nico Collins comes back, right?
Yeah,
it's against the Lions, then CJ Stroud and Tank Dell and
Yeah.
Nico Collins are all going to be great plays in that game. Maybe one more game down bad for CJ Stroud. We also had more news this Tuesday morning. It's been Tuesday mornings has been huge days for NFL news. But before we get into the Joe Flacco starting over Anthony Richardson and the Diontae Johnson trade, I want to remind everyone that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, shortly after we got the Stefon Diggs news, it was announced that Anthony Richardson is going to be benched for Joe Flacco. Now, it makes sense for this matchup, right, against the Vikings. The Colts are 4-4. I do think the Colts will win more games with Joe Flacco. it's just an interesting concept for the Colts to be benching Anthony Richardson this early in his career, with only so many starts under his belt when they knew he was a raw prospect. Kind of a weird team decision, but great for fantasy.
Is it all that great for fantasy? I think we're going to see just the same pop-ups, right? I mean, Josh Downs still produced, and the one thing that Anthony Richardson was doing, and really Joe Flacco's been doing, they've been living on the big plays downfield. For Joe Flacco, it was thrown out up to Alec Pierce a few times last week. Richardson's last start for now was just popping it up to Josh Downs. I mean, he was terrible for the rest of the game, but he made these big plays. The weird thing is, Anthony Richardson has been terrible in a lot of ways, but he leads the NFL in yards per completion. So this team wants to push the ball downfield. They're just very inefficient in doing so. And that's not good, right? That hasn't been good for Michael Pittman Jr. as an intermediate receiver. They're not getting the ball to anybody else, right? It's like deep ball or bust with this passing game if it's not handing it off to Jonathan Taylor. So Joe Flacco can steady that a little bit, but look, they got to get a little bit more of that inside stuff going on. Like, where are the tight ends being used, right? Where's Pittman getting open? I think the Shane Steichen offense is just maybe too dependent on just running and throwing deep, but where's the middle of the field and all that? So I think that's what you need back here if Flacco is going to be effective. I think Downs looked like he was going to be okay either way, right? Because Downs is still the big play guy. But this could be a big help to Pittman if Joe Flacco, instead of taking off and running, he has to check it down and throw to those shorter routes.
Yeah, it's interesting with Josh Downs. He actually, like with Flacco, he was getting a lot of the shorter targets. So but he got 12 targets and 9 targets in Flacco's 2 starts. Also had the 9 targets for 82 yards and a touchdown in that game he came in with Pittsburgh. But it just seems a lot safer, right? The completions, the receptions were actually coming for Downs. They were shorter. It was only 69 and 66 yards, but he got a touchdown in one of those games with Flacco. But he seems a lot safer with Flacco, while still also having that ceiling to break a big one with him. With Anthony Richardson, it was just, the big one play. And besides that, they really haven't connected at all this year. The issue with Anthony Richardson is just, you mentioned, like, the yards per completion are great, but he's completing 44% of his passes this year. Like, that's not sustainable. You cannot win games, and that's why they've moved on to Flacco. But to give you kind of like a heads up here for later in the segment, Joe Flacco against the Vikings is going to be a really great play this week. And I think Flacco's going to be one of those guys that can be a good streaming option in good matchups. So he will be in our streaming section today when we get to our waiver wire pickups and streamers later on in today's episode. But one more big piece of news we got to get to is Diontae Johnson was traded from the Panthers to the Ravens. Not necessarily the landing spot I was, hoping for or even considering for Johnson. It kind of seems like a random fit for me.
Yeah, I'm quite confused why they added him, right? I mean, Rashad Bateman had been coming on a little bit. You have Zay Flowers is playing terrific ball. You have the tight ends working well together. So I don't know where there's going to be balls to go to Diontae Johnson. Do they get him just for the Steelers games so he gets motivated and brings some revenge to those games? I don't know. Or was he just miserable in Carolina and just wanted to get out of there? Like, why did I end up here? I did love sharing a wide receiver room with George Pickens, but I also didn't want to go to this worst team. And he's also hurt, right? He didn't play last week. So I don't know. It's bizarre. But what I know, I think it really is more tied to the Panthers and their youth movement. I'm not sure who they like more. Is it Jalen Coker? Is it Xavier Legette? I don't know. Like, we need to find out more about these young players. I thought they were going to throw to Jatavion Sanders more. And so there's working back in Tommy Trumbull. So I have no idea what you get for the Panthers. What happens when Adam Thielen returns? Is Andy Dalton going to be back? So a lot more questions, but it just makes me off the Panthers even more here than I already was in trying to force them into my lineups.
Yeah, I think Legette becomes an interesting pickup. He'll be in our waiver wire conversation as a possible guy you might want to grab there. First round rookie this year. He's going to get the chance to be the Panthers wide receiver 1. Now, if it continues to be Bryce Young at quarterback, I don't know if that matters. But if Andy Dalton comes back, that could be a good spot for him to be in. But are you worried about Zay Flowers? Because Zay Flowers has been on fire. Of course, the one game we loved him against the Buccaneers, he gets hurt and only has 1 reception, 11 yards. But the other 3 games over the last four weeks, 111 yards, 132, and 115. but it's coming off of great target volume, right? 12 targets, 9 targets, 12 targets. Do those go down with Diontae Johnson now?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of need the Ravens to be in some competitive games. So the Buccaneers push them a little bit. The Browns push them, obviously, in one. So you need that to happen. I don't know if the Broncos are going to be all that competitive. Their schedule has been rather easy, and they've been preying on some really bad teams. It's a tough road trip for them. I don't care how well Bo Nix is playing. The Ravens don't allow too much of rushing to quarterbacks. So it could be a little bit tough. And then if they get into run mode, right, with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, then you're worried in those type of games. But when they have to throw a little bit, Lamar is about to catch Baker with the touchdown passes, then it's a little bit better. So you just need to make sure the Ravens keep getting volume. I think those will happen. I don't know if it's in this particular week. I don't think I would even touch anything related to Diontae Johnson or worry about Zay Flowers this week, even with some tough Broncos corners coming to town.
Yeah. I'll be moving down Flowers a little bit just because of the matchup. But again, like Diontae Johnson's not going to be in consideration to play this week. We are going to get into our waiver wire rankings for week 9. Some of these guys are based off the news that happened today. Some are other injuries that happened this week. And some are just guys that should not be on waivers, but are still sitting there that you need to check out. We'll get into all of that right after a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, because you'll find the best action right there. Get ready to tackle the second half of the season with FanDuel, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with betting just a $5 bet with the win there. That is a really good deal. So get in on it. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. You're not hopping around there. So if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can also check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Michelle, let's dive into the waiver wire. And there was something related with Monday night. Unfortunately, this player's in the concussion protocol. I was a little bit worried when he left the game early with a different injury, a shoulder injury, but he came back, had the long touchdown. Tyrone Tracy Jr., the rookie running back, that's been amazing. He was going to get a pretty good matchup against the Commanders, who they saw Devin Singletary have a big game the first time around. So it could be Singletary again carrying the load. But if Tracy's out there, and he's surprisingly out there in almost half of Yahoo leagues, you got to grab him. He is definitely taken over a little bit as the Giants lead back when both of those guys are healthy.
Well, he becomes a #1 priority for sure, too, because the running back position on the waivers is just, there's like no options out there. If you're like even in a 10-team league, I'm in one of my main leagues, the Tracy's not out there, but like there's just really no options. So unless you're going to go pick up, the insurance guy to your top guy, like a backup, there's really not many options. Tracy is now a starting running back. He started both games that Singletary's been back. He had 20 carries last night, and he looked amazing. He was my sleeper running back of the week, because the Steelers have been allowing points to the running back position, but they could not stop him at all. Tracy looked so good, averaged 7.3 yards per carry, got the touchdown. He's not even being utilized as a receiving back yet, and he was a wide receiver in college, so he also has that in his wheelhouse as well if they want to start using him there. So Tracy could be a league-winning type of player. Unfortunately, like you said, he might miss a game with a concussion, but he'll be back. Definitely top priority if he's out there. Josh Downs, 49%. So why is he still out there for 50% of leagues? I don't know. But with Joe Flacco now as a starter, he's safe, right? I think he's much safer. He already had the huge week with Anthony Richardson, but he's very safe, and he gets the Vikings this week. He and Keon Coleman should be two guys that are no longer on waivers anywhere.
Yeah, and let's add Cedric Tillman to this mix.
Yep.
He was actually half percentage owned of those two guys. Those are a little bit over 40 to 50%. Cedric Tillman was only managed in 20% of Yahoo leagues, so he's still out there.
But if you listen to us, he should have been.
If you're in leagues that you acted on our advice, then he should be snatched up by you. You should be one of the 20%, right? Yeah. But if you see him on there and somebody just forgot about him, or you didn't believe him after the one game filling in for Amari Cooper. Well, he had a second game. He scored the game-winning touchdown. He looked great with Jameis Winston. So sometimes these quarterback changes give us a little shift in the wide receivers we like a little bit more, and just little things, right? The Bills getting Amari Cooper, it unlocked Keon Coleman a little bit more. So always have to pay attention to these changes here this week. So Downs, Coleman, Tillman, they should all be on rosters now because they're part of their team's passing games going forward, and they're not going away. Now, we talked about these injuries. It was not just Stefon Diggs, and now we have the trade that moves Diontae Johnson away, but the Jaguars are really hurting. Christian Kirk went down for the season with a shoulder injury. Brian Thomas, he's battling kind of the same deal that we had Jane Daniels fight through, right? Ribs injury, trying to see if he can tolerate the pain and play. Gabe Davis also exited that game last week against the Packers. So I'm not sure we're going to go there, but this brings up John Mechie or Parker Washington. Are you interested in either of those guys for maybe 1 week plays this week?
Listen, John Mechie just has. I know the Jets aren't as strong of a defense as they once were, but I'm not going to trust John Mechie in my lineups against the Jets. Like, I just think that's going to be a running game. And after this week, if Nico Collins comes back, then who cares about John Mechie, right? So I'm really not going out there trying to pick him up. I think Gabe Davis could be very interesting. I know some might look at Parker Washington, but he had his opportunities last year with injuries. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
He played a good chunk of the game this past Sunday. Didn't really do anything. Like, just too low of a ceiling for him and too low of a floor, honestly, too. Gabe Davis could be that big play guy. With Christian Kirk gone for the year, Gabe Davis is going to have to step up. And it sounds like he's going to be fine for week 9. He left the game with an injury. Sounds like he's going to play. So if I'm going to go with a guy from the Jaguars, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. has to miss any time, it's Gabe Davis for sure. Now, if Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't have to miss time, I think it's just Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram going forward that are the two huge guys. Would you rather pick up Gabe Davis or Xavier Legette from the Panthers now that he's supposed to be the wide receiver 1 for the Panthers?
Yeah, Gabe Davis does have some upside if he's the main outside guy. I mean, I think Parker Washington, if you have the back of the roster and you want to see what he can do replacing Christian Kirk, he's that type of player. Will he get the same type of volume? I'm not sure. You mentioned Ingram. So, again, these are only moves that you're going to make if you're super desperate at this position. I think we told you the ones that are going to be more regular plays for you, Downs, Coleman, and Tillman. I think the question is here, how long are these guys going to be out to beyond that we saw Kirk going down for the season, right? If it's a short-term deal for Thomas, if Davis can play through it, then there's just less appeal on other guys here. So, and Mechie, you're right. It's not a good matchup. If it lined up, say they were playing the Ravens or something like that, you could go there, but the Jets are just a little too hard. Now, the Jet, I like the upside. I just don't like the way this Panthers team just spreads it to a bunch of guys. I don't quite understand it. Like, get the youth involved that you drafted, Legette, Sanders. These two guys should be targeted a lot in this offense, and they're not.
I will say the Panthers get to play the Saints this week. Even the Chargers wide receivers had good games against the Saints. Like, the Saints defense does not exist. So if you need someone for 1 week, it'd be great if Andy Dalton could be back. But Legette did score a touchdown this past week, did have 7 targets, only turned in 34 yards, but he got the touchdown. I would go with him for the 1 week play because also the Jaguars have a pretty tough matchup against the Eagles defense that's been really good. Like, if Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't play, then Gabe Davis is going to have to get a lot of targets. So it's not the worst play ever, but I think I'd go with Legette if you just need a 1 week play with other, like maybe you have George Pickens on a bye or Deebo Samuel because the 49ers and Steelers are on a bye, or you're dealing with some injuries. What about Josh Palmer? I just talked about how these Chargers wide receivers had a great game against the Saints. His game wasn't great. It was 2 receptions for 72 yards, only 4 targets. I have zero desire for Josh Palmer.
Now, the funny thing is Ladd McConkey broke out, but he's heavily managed in a lot of leagues. No one has dropped him. I think it's a name. Everyone knows who he is. Everyone just expected him to have a big breakout year. He was the hot sleeper. But Josh Palmer, I'll tell you what he does. He's the field stretcher here. And you're seeing a little bit more of that from the Chargers offense, especially with Quentin Johnson hurt, that Palmer's in that role. And I will say the Browns give up a lot of big plays downfield. So it's a little bit of maybe a DFS type of play here, looking for someone cheap to load up your lineup. I don't know if I would play him in regular, but maybe you're just looking for one weaker, right? And you have George Pickens and you need a replacement. You don't really have anyone there, or you're looking at Deebo Samuel and you need someone to fill in, or you've just been streaming guys with Brandon Ayuk out. There's all these kind of options, right, that you would maybe put Palmer in. But yeah, I'll say this: Palmer does have some upside, but it's going to be boom or bust, and that's my concern with like a lot of these big play receivers. You just have to accept that in some of these games. But I do like the fact Justin Herbert in this Chargers passing game is starting to come alive a little bit to make us feel a little bit better about just these weapons in general. Maybe Herbert is playable at some point this season as well.
Maybe. I think
Maybe,
it just had more to do with the Saints than it does with the Chargers
yeah.
offense. We're going to get into the best streaming quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses this week. There's a lot of good quarterback matchups that are sitting out there in waivers if you need a quarterback to play this week. So we'll dig into those guys right after we take a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? History, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of U.S. Constitution. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. Or even if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed basic fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. It's very important now with election day and voting coming up to learn a lot about the things that are the foundation of our society. And Hillsdale College, our sponsors, offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses there for you, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and a brand new documentary style course on Marxism, socialism, and communism. So you can really learn about the political systems and voting and how our economy and all that works here. This is all important here as we make decisions with our local and national elections this week. So check it out. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lecture. Go right now to hillsdale.edu. That's hillsdale.edu/lockdown to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockdown to register. Again, hillsdale.edu/lockdown to check out Hillsdale College and all their free courses now.
This episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. If your fantasy team is kind of down the drain this year, right? You're like, I have no hope. Well, guess what? Prize Picks, you get to play fantasy again, right? This is basically what you're doing. You're saying, I love this guy this week. I'm going to take more on whatever his stat projection is, or I don't like this guy this week, so I don't think he's going to hit this projection, and you can take the less. It's a great time. You can set different lineups. Vinnie and I will give you our 6 favorite Prize picks of the week on Friday's show, as we always do. But if you want to get signed up and started before then, all you have to do is download the Prize Pick app today and use code LOCKDOWNNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKDOWNNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win. Prize Picks, run your game. A lot of great options on the waivers this week for streaming quarterbacks, especially now that Joe Flacco is going to play, because he gets the Vikings and Joe Flacco is going to throw it up and the Vikings can't stop the pass at all. So amazing matchup for him. And he's been a pretty good fantasy quarterback whenever he starts over the last 2 years. Matthew Stafford with both of his wide receivers back. It's the Seahawks. The Seahawks have been struggling mightily on defense. Bo Nix, who's been surprisingly very good for fantasy, gets the Ravens, who allowing a ton of points, but it does seem like a sneaky, tough matchup to go into Baltimore as a rookie quarterback. And then Derek Carr should be coming back. He almost played this past week. He gets the Panthers, and he had 2 good fantasy games to start the year. Maybe he has a good one, but rank those 4 guys for me in terms of who you want to start this week.
Yeah, I do like Stafford quite a bit, and I like Stafford actually going forward as a guy that you can have and play in some good matchups because, again, he's got his two wide receivers back. When you have two of the league's elite wide receivers in your lineup and they're making plays, then you know you're going to run the ball effectively with Kyron Williams to open up the field for the passing game. Matthew Stafford is locked in. I mean, that was the only thing missing, right? That's why he wasn't putting up any games. Immediately he gets these guys, and it's like the second half of last season in his production. So I like him not only for this week, but someone you can start in a lot of games this season. Now, I want to say Bo Nix based on the numbers, but again, I told you that stat about the Ravens don't allow much rushing to quarterbacks, which is an interesting thing because they have good linebackers and all that. So that is a big part of Bo Nix's game. So keep that in mind. You just can't blindly look at the numbers. Oh, the Ravens are giving up a lot to the quarterback, right? How are they doing it? How is this player producing? So I'd say Flacco's next. I mean, you might have to live with some turnovers and sacks with Joe Flacco. You just have to do it. But you figure they'd also be in a negative game script, right? The Vikings should go after them, and the Colts should just be putting it up here in the second half. I definitely think the Vikings will crush the Colts on the other side, so that could create some volume. Now, I put Nix third. I just don't have any interest in Derek Carr because I think with the Panthers, I mean, I would just go nuts running with Alvin Kamara, and I don't think the Panthers are going to score enough where Derek Carr is going to need to have more than like 15 attempts in this game.
I know, but also at the same time, it's the Panthers. They just
Yeah,
allowed Bo Nix to put up 4 touchdowns against
I
them.
know, but
Derek Carr could do that as well. It's just it's hard to
yeah,
trust Derek Carr
yeah,
ever. I really have a hard time trusting Bo Nix going into Baltimore.
yeah.
Like I know he had a big game against the Panthers. He's had 3 good fantasy weeks out of the last 4 games, but I just really do. I think it's kind of a trap game for him. The
Yeah,
Ravens
just
aren't
be
going to.
worried about playing rookie quarterbacks on the road, right? I mean, Caleb Williams, you saw, went to Washington, wasn't as good as when he had the home games, right? Or the neutral site game in London, right? So that's just something you have to keep in mind a little bit. They're still rookies and can be messed with. So be careful. I just can't sit and recommend Derek Carr on his first game back. I mean, it would be wrong. It just doesn't kind of line up with the way we think of this podcast, Michelle. So
Well, luckily you shouldn't have to because Joe
yeah,
Flacco or Stafford should be out
yeah,
there.
I like
They're
that.
both our
Yeah.
top 2. I think I lean Stafford as well, but I really, really like Flacco this week. They're probably gonna be ranked very closely to each other. I might actually go Flacco. He just always throws multiple touchdowns. Now he could throw, like you said, multiple interceptions. But if that's the case, he's going to have to even throw more, right? If he does
Yeah.
throw interceptions. So I think at the end of the day, it'll come out great. Kyron Williams could steal the touchdowns from Stafford. That's my
That's a good
worry
point.
against Seattle. So I think I actually lean Joe Flacco slightly against
Okay.
the Vikings, but I agree with you, Stafford for the rest of the season if I had to pick one of those guys. Moving on to tight ends. Zach Ertz is still out there in a lot of leagues. I think at this point, he's just a weekly good, solid play.
Yeah.
He's continually just getting the targets. He had 11 targets this last week, 77 yards, 7 receptions. He had a touchdown in week 7. Gets the Giants. He's just the best option out there if he's available.
Yeah, for sure. And some of these guys have not worked out consistently that we looked at. I mean, Tyler Conklin, you just have to get lucky with a touchdown. I don't like the matchup against Texans. I mean, he's a guy that maybe should be rostered as a tight end too if you're looking for a backup, but I can't recommend him in that matchup this week. Now, you also had put down Will Dissly. We'll see if they enter him back in the mix. Again, the Browns did give it up to Mark Andrews last week, so they can be a little bit exposed there. But does Will Dissly get enough work here now that the Palmer and Ladd McConkey? It's sometimes spreading the ball around. So that's my only concern with Dissly. Can he get consistently involved? Now, I did have another name I was going to throw at you because he definitely was a lot more involved without T. Higgins. Mike Gesicki. He did lead the team in receiving yards, the Bengals. He gets the Raiders, who give up quite a bit to the tight end. They got Travis Kelce in the end zone for the first time this season. So would Gesicki be a play? And this is for people that I think were playing Pat Freiermuth or playing George Kittle and don't want to waste too much capital getting somebody to plug in, right? I mean, I think you also have to think about that. It's like, hey, do you really need a backup? I just want to play one guy for 1 week. Gesicki might be it if Higgins is out.
No, Gesicki is a great pick. After Zach Ertz, I think that's the next guy, especially if T. Higgins doesn't play. When T. Higgins is out, it's like Gesicki's the next guy, right?
Yeah,
Of those big
it's weird.
plays. They give him those big play opportunities when Higgins is not in. So I think that's a great pick. Good matchup against the Raiders. So either Zach Ertz or Mike Gesicki, those are pretty much your two options out there for streaming tight ends. And then looking at defense, there's a lot of good choices this week. They're kind of risky though ones. Eagles defense has really been balling out. They get the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence likes to fumble or throw interceptions and doesn't have all of his weapons. So that's a great play if the Eagles are out there. Would you consider the Bengals defense against the Raiders? I know the Bengals defense has been so bad, but so has the Raiders offense.
Yeah, the Bengals I'm having a hard time with. I think I would play them. I would just lean because the Raiders can still make a lot of mistakes with Gardner Minshew. What I'm hoping there is the Bengals will get a lead, right? And then they can get the pass rush going. Like if they're playing even with the Raiders, that's going to blow up in our face. And sometimes these games come down to that, right? The Bengals have to play well and come out firing with Joe Burrow, get a lead, and then you can get the pass rush, the sacks, the takeaways. That's what happened. So I think they have a shot of doing that for sure this week. So I'm going there. Same thing with the Eagles. They should be playing from ahead. Now, the Saints are an interesting one. They've been up and down, and part of it is due to their offense has stunk. So that means their defense has been more exposed. But they do have some injuries. They're not the defense we've come to know from Dennis Allen. They're missing a lot of tackles. Would you trust them with the Panthers? Say it's Andy Dalton versus Bryce Young.
If it's Bryce Young, I trust the Saints. If it's Andy Dalton, maybe not, because the Saints defense has been pretty bad. I do think, though, if Derek Carr plays, the offense puts up a lot of points against the Panthers, which will allow the Saints to be a little bit better on defense. This is a bold play, though. It has to be like there's not the Eagles available. There's not the Bengals available. There's not the Commanders, who have been like all of a sudden a good defense. They get the Giants. Like that's a good play this week. I would go with those guys over the Saints. What about the Patriots and the Titans? They play each other. Just a disgusting game in general.
Yeah, we'll see if it's Jacoby Brissett versus Mason Rudolph. It also could be Will Levis versus Drake May. We don't know. There's a lot of injury variables here. Now, Mason Rudolph still had some issues, right? The Lions scored on special teams. So the thing is, you can't forget about the special teams aspect, right? If the team is bad overall, they can also give up a return for a touchdown or something like that. So if I had to pick between the Patriots and Titans, I know the Titans are the home team. I would pick the Patriots because I trust them a little bit more that they'll scheme up and make some plays, where I think the Patriots could just run and have some success that way with Ramondre Stevenson and kind of protect the ball, where I think the Titans will probably be too aggressive, whether it's Rudolph or Levis, and make those mistakes. So it's close, but I think if you had the 49ers or Steelers and you were just playing them every week, you need a cheap team and you don't want to fight anyone for it, you can probably get one of these teams and plug it in and just get some decent results.
Yeah, the Patriots definitely over the Titans. I agree with you, especially like if Drake May's back, Drake May can get this done in this game. So Titans not really too excited to play, but if they get Jacoby Brissett, it could end up nice. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a review on wherever you're listening to this episode, on whatever podcast app you prefer. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you again to you all. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.